What's up YouTube? So today we are discussing the dreaded subject, how do you plaster a ceiling? Well, you'll be pleased to know it's nowhere near as difficult as it sounds. So today we are going to go through the process so you can plaster a ceiling to a professional standard. That said, is there a couple of tips just to get you underway, just to make your life easier? You're pleased to know there is. The first thing being, especially if you're new to plastering, you might want to consider wearing eye protection because plastering in your eyes is no joke, it's not pleasant. The second thing being that it's very important to get your height away from the ceiling about right. If you're too far away from the ceiling, so here, although this is a low ceiling, it's a little bit too far out of my reach, that means that the trowel is going to be quite close to being directly under your head when you're plastering. So if anything does fall, it's going to hit you in the face. The same as if you're a bit too close, as you're bringing the trowel around, you run the risk of the plaster flicking off the trowel, and again, you haven't got enough time to react, and you run the risk of it hitting you in the face. So here, because this is a lower ceiling than normal, I'll just be using a crate to move around. So most importantly, get the distance about right. I had one one builder who said that he thought that about the distance from your thumb to your finger away from the ceiling was roughly about right. But the reality is it's whatever your preference is, what feels right for you. But to get underway with the actual plastering, most important, knock up or mix up the plaster as you normally would. Don't make it too stiff, don't make it too wet. We've already explained the right amount of water in other videos to mix up plaster. So mix the consistency as it should be done on the bag. If you need a bit of extra time, then use something like a sachet of extra time so that you can drag out the set rather than making it runnier or stiffer. So to get us underway, what we're going to do is we're going to plaster all the way along and go around in a big ring as we are plastering. You'll have to excuse my makeshift bucket trowel. Unfortunately, my bucket trowel's gone missing. So to start with, you just want to take your time to get the corner right. Just fill the corner out. Once you started it, doesn't take long. And then you want to try and reach as far as you can into the middle of the room. So nice long strokes as far as you can reach. I always find that it helps to stand just slightly to the side of the plaster, just in case anything does drop and fall on your head. What we're going to do is we're just going to run all the way around this room in a ring and then come back to where we started. So I'll time lapse that as it's pretty boring. Okay, so now we're coming to the point where we need to flatten the ceiling down. Now, without a doubt, the easiest way to do this is to use a speed skim or a spatula. We've already mentioned before that our preference is to use the Raffina Comfort Grip one. It's the plastic one. You can look at some of our other videos where we review this and as to why it's our preferred choice for a spatula. Now, if it's above your reach, you're going to want to use a spatula pole, but because this is only a 2.2 metre high ceiling, it's a garden room, I can reach this from the floor. Now, ideally, you want to spatula both ways. And as such, you need to pay attention to where the light's coming into the room. Now here, we've got these very large bifolds here. There's some, I think it's nearly 4 metres long, I think, the bifolds. So as such, the second flattening needs to go against where the light's coming across. So what we're going to do is we're going to go this way first with the spatula to flatten it. Now this works just the same flattening with a trowel. There's nothing wrong with that. But the reality is, why would you want to? It's a lot faster using one of these. So I'm pushing quite hard. Any excess that you get here, just get rid of that, I don't need that. Okay, so you can see straight away, what was that, within a couple of minutes, this room, which is about 3.5 metres by 4 point something, is already flattened. That would have taken you 3 times as long to do that with a trowel. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go this way, which is the more important way to go. If you're only going to flatten it once, always go against the direction the window is coming in. So this is by far and away the most important direction to go to in this room. And what that will do, if there are any ripples in the ceiling, they will be less noticeable. As it was the builder that's built this garden room, he's done a lovely job. He's done a nice job with the timber work, and then it's got insulation, and then a layer of plasterboard. So the ceiling is fairly flat. So again, that second time round, flattening it, that whole ceiling, that's all we got off. It was pretty much hardly anything. So now that ceiling is almost perfectly flat. Now for the old guard, as it were, who like to do everything with a 14-inch stainless steel Marshalltown, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But the method of using a speed skim or spatula, the truth of it is, it just makes life so much easier. It's easier on your body. In reality, it does get it a bit flatter, I think, certainly for those that are first coming into plastering. So it's a well worth investment that's well worth getting. I mean, the one that we use, I think it's about £35–40 on Amazon, worth every single penny, and it makes such a difference in how easy it is to flatten. So what we're going to do now is we're going to let that pull in for a bit, and then we're going to put our second coat on. Okay, so we're now at the point where we're going to be putting our second coat of plaster on. Now, just to give you an idea of what the condition of the plaster is, it should be where it's firm enough that your fingers don't dig in, but the top, the plaster should be a little bit greasy. If it's too wet, you can see here, if I was to dig this in, if it dug in like that, then that would be a little bit too wet. However, If it has that, if it's at that point where the top is a bit greasy but your fingers aren't digging in, that's about the right time. Putting the second coat on when it's too wet, pretty much it does absolutely nothing. At the same time, if you put the second coat on where it's a bit too dry, it's almost like they're two separate layers, they're not bonding together. So you're looking to have that greasy type of finish. As you probably can see from my face, it is incredibly hot in this garden room. So I've pretty much flattened off, cleaned up, and I'm ready to go again straight away. So if the room you're plastering in is very, very hot, you won't have long to wait before you have to put that second coat on. So what we're now going to do is follow exactly the same process as the first coat. We're going to start in the corner where we began, and we're going to do the ring around the room, fill in the middle, and then I'll just put that wall on. So I'll catch up when that's on. Okay, so the ceiling has had its second coat. I don't know how clear that's coming out on the camera there. So what we're now going to do is we are going to again use the speed skim, the spatula, and we're going to flatten down what we have just put on. So it'll be the same process as before. So because the light is coming in this direction, what we're going to do is we're going to spat that way first, and then across the light the second time. Okay, so that's had an initial flatten off now in both directions. What we'll probably do is just leave that for 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll go over that again, just flatten it again, just to really take out some of those lines and get the ceiling as flat as we possibly can. Okay, so these walls had and ceiling had an initial flatten about 5 to 10 minutes ago. It's been allowed to pull in a bit, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to flatten it one more time just to take out some of the spatula marks and what have you. At that point we'll leave it for probably 20 minutes or so before we wet trowel it. It's at this point, if you're wanting to sponge, it's at this point that you'd want to do that now. So just to give you an idea, the texture is again similar to when we did the second coat. It's a bit slimy, so the surface is a little bit slimy, but your fingers aren't digging in. That's about the right time to use the sprayer. Also, another good gauge is if you're using a hose lock sprayer, which is down there. If you're using a hose lock sprayer at a fine mist at about a foot or so away from the plaster, it shouldn't be leaving any stippling marks in the plaster. If it is doing that, then the plaster is a bit too wet to sponge, so you want to leave it. But if you're not going to do any sponging, all you need to do now is just to give this one more flatten and then leave it for about 20-30 minutes, something like that, before you wet trowel. So we're going to do that now. Okay, so now we're going to get to the point where we are going for our first wet trowel. Now, how you choose to apply the water is personally up to you. You can use a sprayer or you can use a brush. I just prefer using a brush, and you can either wipe it on or you can flick it. Again, I prefer to wipe the brush on the plaster. There's no right or wrong way. Now, just as a guide, if you are using a brush and you're wiping it on, a good gauge is if you wipe the brush over the plaster and the brush scratches the plaster, so you're leaving brush marks on the plaster, that's usually a sign that the plaster is too wet for its first wet trowel. So if you're wiping water on the plaster with a brush and it's not leaving scratch marks, that's a sign you're good to go. Now, because the ceiling is low, I'm going to do it on without a hopper, and I've got a fairly low angle, and I'm pushing quite hard. Now, what you're trying to achieve, so you will find on the first wet trowel that you will get a lot of plaster that comes off the wall. That is totally normal. Just wipe that on the bucket. You don't particularly want to keep that. Wipe that on the bucket. I personally prefer to wipe, put water on the area that I'm going to use the trowel. Nice, even pressure. Can just wipe the plaster off onto the brush, wipe it on the ceiling. Again, just wipe off that fatty plaster. You don't really want to be putting that in the ceiling. If you have a little look, this here is what it's looking like. This is what it was like before on the wet trowel. So again, this is just the first of 2 wet trowels we're going to do. And you'll just go through this process across the whole ceiling. So what we're going to do is we're going to skip to the point where this is finished. This wet trowel is finished. So we'll catch up once that's done. Okay, so now we have done a first wet trowel over the ceiling. You can see this is how it's coming out. So let's have 1 wet trowel. Wall's the same. So what we're now going to do, I like to use this time just to go over. It's a bit dark. I like to go over the ceiling lines just to make sure they're properly filled out. The nice thing about doing it now is that because the plaster is still a little bit malleable, if you've got any holes in your ceiling line, it's a lot easier to fill them in now. So what we're going to do is we're just going to use a margin trowel. They're pretty cheap to buy. And then you're just going to force the trowel into the corner like this, right up against the screw tape. Okay, so we are now at the point where we're going to do the second wet trowel on this ceiling. Now, to give you an idea of what you're looking for when it comes to your second wet trowel, if you were to touch the ceiling, it is touch dry. You can see you're touching it and it's not leaving any marks. Now, because this room is so hot, which hopefully is evident by the massive amount of sweat down my face and my shirt. It's been a very unpleasant job, I must admit. I only had to wait probably 10 minutes or so, 10-15 minutes between that first wet trowel and the second wet trowel. But essentially what you are looking for is for it to have, after your first wet trowel, is that it is now touch dry. It should start going almost like a slightly eggshell sort of feeling to it. That's the point where you should be good for your second wet trowel. Now, obviously, timing-wise, it really depends on what the conditions are in the room. I think it's how to plaster a wall. That video we have on our channel, it was so cold in that house. It took absolutely ages for us to be able to do the second wet trowel. Here it is incredibly hot and it's going very, very quick. It's been a relatively fast plastering set. I think we're just pretty much over 2 hours on the second wet trowel, so it's been a bit of a slog. But what we're going to do is we are going to run the water again. What I like to do just in the corner is very, very carefully use the toe of the trowel just to get initially in the corner. Just like that. Just rub that corner. Wipe that off. Now, you should, if the timing's about right, be getting very little to no fat coming off, which should really just be pretty much dirty water. That's really what you should be looking at for. So if you were to have a look now on the trowel, it's just It's just a bit of dirty water with a tiny amount of fat. If you're still getting lots of fat coming off the trowel on your second wet trowel, you're hitting it way too early. So just leave it a little bit longer. So what I'm going to do, it's pretty much the same as the first wet trowel. I'm just going to go over and do that second wet trowel now, and then I'll show you what it looks like once it's finished. So this has had now its second wet trowel, and it's pretty much there now. As you can see, having done a lot of the legwork very early on, it's come out very nice on the second wet trowel. So now all I will be doing is just giving it a quick pass over with the plastic trowel as a dry pass or a dry trowel, just to finish it off, to give it that really nice, smooth, silky finish. So hopefully you have found this video helpful. Hopefully there's some tips in there which will help you to be able to plaster a ceiling to a standard like this. I'd like to say thank you so much for everyone who's watching, and also for the new subscribers joining the channel. It really is appreciated. We hope you enjoy the content. Consider subscribing and giving it a thumbs up, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks again.